Good morning, MacLaren. My name is Mr. VonBoeck, and today I would like to talk to you about a little-known ruler of a great nation. He is a true enigma of a man, who some might call a lunatic, and others a tyrant. And perhaps under different circumstances this is how he would be remembered. But over the course of his wise and judicious reign of 20 years, he gave cause to be remembered for quite different reasons, which I will talk about today. I am speaking of Norton I, Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico from 1859 to 1880. You might very well be surprised to hear that we had an emperor in the United States, and you would be right to be surprised. The United States is a constitutional republic. We of course have representatives, a senate, a president, but no emperor, at least not officially. So how did we come to have an emperor when, during the time of Norton's reign, there were 4 presidents who were thought, at least, to be the leaders of this country? Well, that is an excellent question, and we will begin by diving into some backstory. Now, Joshua Norton's past is shrouded in mystery, but we do know some basic biographical details. He was born in 1818 in England, though he spent most of his young life in South Africa. He was a man of business from a family of business. His father ran a shop, which he helped out with. After his father's death, he quickly paid off his father's debts and moved to San Francisco in the year of 1848. Upon arriving, he established himself very quickly as a businessman in the area and became a regular in the upper echelons of San Francisco society. In 1852, he decided to invest in rice. There had been a famine in China, and as a result, rice was kind of difficult to come by. So he bought some rice that had come in from Peru. Unfortunately, several more ships of rice came in after Norton had already agreed to his purchasing price, and all of these ships had a lot of rice on them. As a result, the price plummeted, and Norton was not able to make a profit whatsoever on the rice that he had purchased. He took his losses to court, but ultimately the court ruled against him, and he was ruined financially. Disheartened, he moved into a dingy boarding house in 1858 and was not heard from again for the next year. What transpired in Joshua Norton's soul as he sat in those dingy and possibly rat-filled chambers? Did he lament his bad fortune? Bemoan the past? Prepare for the future? Perhaps we will never know exactly, but we do know that he emerged from this year of solitude a changed man. September 17th, 1859. The following is published in the San Francisco Evening Bulletin newspaper. At the peremptory request of a large majority of the citizens of these United States, I, Joshua Norton, formerly of Algoa Bay, Cape of Good Hope, and now for the last 9 years and 10 months past of San Francisco, California, declare and proclaim myself Emperor of these United States. Norton concluded his decree by calling upon the United States Congress to gather in San Francisco to address many of the laws which Norton felt to be unjust in the country, including the legal protection of human slavery. He signed the decree with his new title, Norton I, Emperor of the United States. Surprisingly, the members of Congress did not take much of an interest of Norton if they heard about him at all. But not to be outdone, Norton issued a series of further imperial decrees. In his next official act, 1 month later, Norton declared that the United States Congress was officially dissolved. In his next, he called for the army to forcibly remove Congress from Washington, D.C. And in what is perhaps the grand finale of this series of decrees, Norton said the following: Now, therefore, we, Norton I, by the grace of God, Emperor of the 33 states and the multitude of territories of the United States of America, do hereby dissolve the Republic of the United States, and it is hereby dissolved. And all laws made from and after this date, either by the National Congress or any state legislature, shall be null and of no effect. Lest the populace be driven to anarchy, the emperor added, "All governors and all other persons of authority shall maintain order by enforcing the heretofore existing laws and regulations until the necessary alterations can be effected." While Emperor Norton's claims went completely unheeded by Congress, it would be a mistake to assume that he was unheeded by all. Indeed, the citizens of his adopted city of San Francisco showed him the proper deference due to his office. Perhaps this had to do with the way that Norton comported himself. For though he was poor in every material sense of the word, he truly carried himself like an emperor. In the morning he would wake and dress himself up in the uniform of a Union general. After this, he would go to the Empire Hotel and read his morning paper to stay on top of all of the events in the world of news. He spent the remainder of his morning in conversation with friends on benches in the park. He lunched for free at a local restaurant, another imperial privilege. In the afternoons he would study, play chess, or write imperial decrees from the library, and in his evenings he would pass his time at debate societies or lectures. Norton's duties as emperor precluded him from any formal sort of employment, and as a result, he had no income. His monthly room and board, free meals, gifts and alms from people on the streets, the very means by which he subsisted, these he referred to as taxes. He also collected taxes from local businesses, which they, in fact, paid him. Eventually, Norton actually began making his own currency, which came to be widely accepted at various shops throughout San Francisco. This was a good turn of events for the financial life of Emperor Norton, for as aspiring journalist and sympathetic imperial observer Samuel Clemens said, "Oh dear, it was always a painful thing for me to see the emperor begging, for although nobody else believed he was an emperor, he himself believed it." And Norton truly did believe himself to be the emperor. Upon meeting an old acquaintance who had known him before his assumption of the imperial title, Norton was asked, "Why do you pretend that you're emperor, and why do you dress up in this uniform?" Norton quickly ran to the hallway, looked both ways, came back inside, shut the door, and began speaking in a whispered voice. He told his friend that as a child he was actually born to the Bourbon family in France, and, as a result of the French Revolution, was given to his family, whose Jewish last name would protect him from being discovered by assassins. Upon hearing this story, Norton's acquaintance told him, "I think that you're crazy." Not to miss a beat, Norton replied, "And so do a good many others." Whatever fascination and amusement we might take in Emperor Norton's story, the point raised by his acquaintance is one which we cannot ignore. The fact that Norton believed himself to be Emperor of the United States and a descendant of French royalty naturally should lead us to question whether he was in his right mind, and will naturally lead us to conclude that he probably was not. Worse still, Norton's conviction that he was emperor led to many jokes at his expense. Random bystanders would give him notes that they said were telegrams from the Tsar of Russia, celebrating his upcoming marriage to Queen Victoria. Others published comic strips, describing Norton as just some sort of zany accident of San Francisco, putting him on par with the highly popular dogs, Bummer and Lazarus, who were known for running wildly about the streets of San Francisco, but were allowed to do what they did because they were good at hunting rats. The more I think about Emperor Norton's story, the more I wonder why I am fascinated by it. His situation itself leads us to laugh, just as we would laugh when we first heard that Emperor Caligula appointed his horse to the consulate. But was Emperor Norton known and loved by those around him only as an object of laughter and mockery? In the last, I find it encouraging that the sort of affection that San Franciscans had and still have for Emperor Norton seems to be something much warmer than derision. Upon Norton's death, one paper ran the following headline: "Le roi est mort," the king is dead. Thousands flocked to his funeral, and the procession that followed his casket to the cemetery was more than 2 miles long. Over 10,000 citizens visited Emperor Norton as he lay in state, people of every age and walk of life. Why this warm remembrance? An obituary for Norton from another local newspaper, the one where Samuel Clemens, later to be known as Mark Twain, worked, is quite telling. It reads, "Other sovereigns have died with no more of kindly care. Other sovereigns have died as they have lived, with all the pomp of earthly majesty. But death having touched them, Norton one rises up the exact peer of the haughtiest king or kaiser that ever wore a crown. Perhaps he will rise more than the peer of most of them. He had a better claim to kindly consideration than his lot forbade to wade through slaughter to a throne and shut the gates of mercy on mankind. Through his harmless proclamations can always be traced an innate gentleness of heart, a desire to effect uses, and a courtesy, the possession of which would materially improve the bitterful living princes, whose names will naturally suggest themselves." In contrast to rulers of days present and bygone, who were remembered for their coldness and despotism, Norton was remembered by the citizens of San Francisco for his goodness and gentleness. Later in his career as emperor, Norton began focusing more specifically on issues related to San Francisco rather than those of national governance. He was an advocate on behalf of the Chinese population of San Francisco, which was rampantly discriminated against at the time. Indeed, when an angry mob threatened the lives of several Chinese citizens, Norton burst through the crowd to stop them, allegedly yelling, "We are all God's children." Also issued a decree calling for the construction of a suspension bridge between San Francisco and Oakland. While no such bridge was constructed during Norton's lifetime, one was eventually built, and it was therefore his only decree, perhaps, which ever came to any effect. Although he received no credit for it at the time, there have been several campaigns since then to have the bridge renamed in Norton's honor, or to at least put a commemorative plaque by it. And because of the great deal of interest in Norton's life and story, it seems that, for whatever reason, he will be a part of our country's history for as long as there is such a thing. Have a great day, MacLaren.